welcome to Stocks, Tech, and Beer, where we talk stocks and technology while drinking an adult beverage. Today we're going to talk about Intel's horrible earnings report, what it means for the rest of the semiconductor industry. But first, let's talk about our drinking. Today, it's a Saturday afternoon, doing some day drinking. You got to find something with low alcohol content. You can't be pounding down those 8% beers, getting sloppy, passing out in the middle of the day. Want something to keep going. So I grabbed a Point Special Lager right here, so we get that in focus. And this is a small brewery just north of where I'm staying in Stevens Point, hence the name. And it is the second longest continuously running brewery in the country. The only one that's running longer is Yingling. So you'd think it'd be a good beer. Generally, it's not. Let's see what happens. Yeah, just like Intel's earnings, this is a terrible beer. I'm going to take into consideration it's at least a year old. I found in the back of my dad's fridge where I knew a terrible beer would be lurking, and it lived up to its hope. We'll give it a, say, 3 out of 10. Now we got that out of the way, we get into the good stuff. But first, I'm not a financial advisor. Just a guy drinking terrible beer on a Saturday afternoon by himself, talking to you. So if that screams a great investment advisor, great stock advice, go ahead, follow it, but please do your own homework and make sure it fits into your overall investing scheme. So Intel, what did it do besides crap the bed? It was down 16% after earnings yesterday. I mean, it was just terrible. Intel is just the worst semiconductor company out there in the world today. Maybe not the worst, but close. I mean, I knew they had a problem back when I was at the Consumer Electronics Show in January. I watched the AMD presentation about their newest semiconductors, and they had performance specs charts. They had like bars out to who knows how long they were for performance, and then Intel's little dinky bar and AMD's was a lot longer. And then I go from there talking about tech specs and how fast these semiconductors are going, how many processes are running per second. I go to Intel, and the first things that guy says is, we're not here to talk about specifications of our semiconductors and how fast they go. That's boring. We're here to talk about what our semiconductors can enable. And went on to tell a bunch of stories. Let that be a warning sign. If you ever hear a tech company start telling stories instead of talking about how great their tech is, that's a sign to not walk, but run away from that stock. And aside from Intel, I'm sure they're down on the year after being just punished yesterday on Friday after those earnings. Intel is just where tech goes to die. I mean, I think they've written off pretty much every acquisition they've done before 2017. They did Atom Mobile. I think they paid about $10 billion for that. Tried to make a 5G modem. Couldn't figure out how that was done. So they ended up selling that to Apple for about $1 billion last year. Then there was Altera Semiconductors. They were an FPGA company, a field programmable array, a real specialized semiconductor. That's pretty flexible in the applications it can run and how it operates. But anyways, Altera, one of the best in the industry, in the FPGA industry, and Intel wrote off that whole $16.7 billion acquisition because tech goes to die in Intel. Hopefully do better with Mobileye, so we see some driverless cars, and the recent Abana Labs and MoveIt acquisitions. Love to see those companies keep progressing forward, but it's hard to have any hope, once they're in that little void of black holeness. What did Intel say that was so bad? Well, their earnings actually not terrible. They beat the revenue expectations, and they were up 20% from this quarter last year, and they beat their earnings profit estimates by about 10%, and they guided revenues up for the whole year from $73.5 billion to $75 billion. So I mean that's a pretty good move up. 1.5 billion more of revenue than what they had anticipated earlier. But nobody cares about earnings this year. I mean, it's a pandemic. Everyone's looking for what's going to happen in 2021 and 2022. This year is a wash. Earnings almost don't matter. What matters more is the guidance and what they're saying going forward. And what Intel said going forward was bad news. And when Intel gets bad news, it has ramifications for the whole semiconductor industry. I mean, Intel is massive. Up until a couple weeks ago, when NVIDIA passed it in market cap, Intel was the biggest semiconductor company in in the world. And they probably still are by revenue. I don't think NVIDIA is bringing in 75 bill in a year. But what happens at Intel will ripple through the entire semiconductor industry. And that's exactly what happened through this earnings report. I mean, Intel dropped some absolute bombshells this quarter. Bombshell number one. That's Intel announced that its 7 nanometer production of semiconductors is going to be delayed another 6 to 12 months. It's not going to be until late 2022 or early 2023 when these semiconductors will actually get made by Intel. And that's unbelievable. Intel used to be a leading semiconductor company. I mean, AMD has these 7 nanometer chips. 7 nanometers is just the distance between the transistors. The shorter the distance, more transistors you can fit in a chip. Faster it goes, more energy efficient the chip is. But yeah, AMD has these 7 nanometer chips already being processed. They're Ryzen Zen 2 chips, 7 nanometers. They're out. You can buy them. And there's Zen 3 they just announced. It's going to be awesome. That'll be coming out at the end of the year. And then, I mean, by the time Intel has these 7 nanometer chips out, AMD is going to have their 5 nanometer chips on the market. Their Ryzen 4 chips are scheduled to be released sometime next year in 2021. So have Intel be this far back, I mean, that's a real reason why Intel was down 16%. It's because AMD is going to absolutely eat Intel's lunch in the processing market. I mean, any laptop's going to be more power efficient with this in. Consumers are going to want it. The processors and data centers are going to be more efficient with 7 nanometer technology. And those guys really care about power usage and capabilities because they have so many CPUs crunching data day in, day out there. I mean, power matters. It'll cut into the profit margins if they can't do that. They can't get lower power. So that's the first bombshell. We need another drink after that. Oh, thank God it's cold. Yeah. Did I say it's 3 out of 10? 3 out of 10. Not a high ranking. It's the lowest we've had so far, even though the show is early. It's still time for some disgusting beer. The other bombshell is that Intel said after decades of making its own semiconductors, it would look into farming out the manufacturing of these processors. And that's because Intel just is falling behind on the technology of doing it. It's their fault that these 7 nanometer chips aren't being processed. It's not anyone else's fault. And they know all these other foundries have better technology. And that's what most semiconductor companies actually do this. They develop the technology and then they have someone like Taiwan Semiconductors go and actually make the chips for them. And Taiwan Semiconductors, they're the ones that make AMD's chips, so they're the best of the best out there. And you also have Global Foundries and Samsung that do some of that as well. And Taiwan Semiconductors was really up big on Friday because of this news. They're up 10% because, I mean, Intel's going to be giving a lot of their business to Taiwan Semiconductors. They're really the only major company that can handle a big workload like this. Like I said, Global Foundries, Samsung, they could also probably do it and they're fine, but Taiwan Semiconductors is the most advanced. And Taiwan Semiconductors is also, they're building that plant with the help of the federal government, subsidies in Arizona that should be ready to go in a couple of years. And that'll probably be the first of many as the U.S. tries to bring manufacturing back on shore to make sure our supply chain doesn't get jacked up by a pandemic or a potential trade war with China as relations there are heating up. So that's a huge deviation from previous policy by Intel to admit that they can't produce their own chips and they're gonna have someone else do it. That's like, that's just decades of tradition out the door, right there. And it'll probably be for the best for Intel. It definitely gets them through this lull in production abilities that they have now. But it's just, I mean, being the leader in the space at one point in time, to have to admit to other people being better is, man, that had to have been a tough pill to swallow for anyone at Intel. I mean, then there's other semiconductor companies as well that were impacted by this, like ASML Holdings. They were down 4 or 5% on the day Friday, and that's because they now have one fewer customer for their EUV technology, which is pretty much necessary to make any semiconductor under 7 nanometers. 7 nanometers. So those 5 nanometer chips that we're talking about need to use EUV technology to get it cold, get them in there real tight, so you have the ability to keep Moore's Law alive. So they were down. they deserved it, but there were other companies that were down that didn't deserve it. A lot of analysts out there on Wall Street took Intel's earnings as a bad omen for the semiconductor industry as a whole. But I mean, that couldn't be further from the truth. Semiconductors have never been more important to the world than they are right now. I mean, let's just think of everything that's happened. We have the 5G build out. I mean, that involves billions of smartphones and millions of base stations, which all need processing units to get the data into the 5G networks. And then all these 5G networks are going to go through hyperscale data centers. Those things have thousands, millions, maybe billions of processing units in them. From there, we have artificial intelligence and machine learning technology, which requires tons of compute power to work right now. You just need to crunch data nonstop for those to work in big data applications. That all requires tons of compute. I mean, even our cars now are going to need more semiconductor content for these electronic features in the cars, like advanced driver assist and autonomous driving. And you have the Internet of Things. I mean, just billions, trillions of semiconductors are going to be needed over the next decade, and Intel's just being left behind. There's nothing wrong with the semiconductor industry as a whole. In fact, I think with Intel falling behind, it puts these other companies in a better position to actually make more money. They all should have been up. It should have been only Intel going down in the day. But I think that mistake by the analysts, thinking that Intel is representative of the whole industry, as well as you have a lot of semiconductor companies owned through tech semiconductor ETFs. So you get those passive investors crapping themselves after seeing Intel have these bad earnings and then just blow out the whole industry. That also had some impact on those companies as well. But I mean, you had companies like Qorvo, just 5G, Skyworks 5G. I mean, these companies they're just going to make a killing over the next couple of years selling into these 5G smartphones. Everybody's going to need a new one. 5G is going to change their lives with 10, 100 times faster speed. It's going to enable applications now that we can't even fathom. It's going to be amazing. Intel is definitely a massive company, and what they say impacted the whole industry. I hope this video helped you think through the knock-on effects of this terrible earnings report, and it's just a tectonic shift in the semiconductor industry going forward. If you liked what you saw in this video, please hit the like button below and subscribe so you get automatic updates to these stock tech updates. I appreciate that. Till next time, cheers. Point beer. It says handcrafted beer on the label here. It tastes more like foot-crafted beer. I just can't believe it. It's like dirty feet got mixed into this beer. It adds flavor, but I don't know if it's the kind of flavor anybody's looking for. It's just vile beer. I know they have other good stuff there. I toured the brewery a couple years ago. It's really cool. They have other stuff, but they need to change this recipe. It's just, I don't think I've ever heard anybody, and I grew up 20 miles from this brewery, I've never heard anybody once ever say, what my favorite go-to beer is? Point Special Lager. Nobody says that. I mean, people here drink crap. I mean, I've seen people just down hams. Busch Light is a huge thing, which is disgusting. I mean, Busch Latte, it's a great marketing campaign. It's terrible. I mean, people drink that, Bud Light, Miller Lite. Might as well drink water, but whatever. But this, nobody ever says that. I don't know how Point Special Lager still gets made. If you like this, put it down in the comments. Let me know why, but I'm curious. Maybe better if it's fresh and not a year or two old or 5 years or who knows. Can anybody timestamp this label? Let me know. I don't know if it's really changed in the past 50 years or so, but if it has, we'll do it. But this is terrible beer. Hope nobody ever goes out of the way for this. Brewery tour is cool. You get pretty buzzed at the end if you do all the samples. Just try some of the other stuff. Only try the lager if you really want to just put some hair in the chest.